Good evening and welcome to today's event. I'm Antonio Villafranca and very glad to open this MED panel on behalf of ISPI. Today's event is organized in cooperation with the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation and the New Policy Center of the New South, which I truly thank for this joint effort. Today's event is part of a series of events organized in preparation of the 7th edition of the Rome Med Conference, which will take place from the 2nd to the 4th of December and is promoted by ISPI and the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. MED, let me just say a few words about it, aims at rethinking traditional approaches to the MENA region, complementing analysis of current challenges with new ideas and suggestions, and to draft a new positive agenda for the future of the area. MED builds upon 4 pillars: shared prosperity, shared security, migration, and civil society and culture. This year, MED will be held once again in presence, taking place through an hybrid format which will combine live in-person events alongside virtual components. And of course, one of the key issues of MED will be environment, green transition, energy transition, which is today the core of today's event, and in particular the link between the EU Green Deal and, of course, the green transition and energy transition of the MENA region. So I don't want to waste your time. Without further ado, let me just first thank all the panelists and all the participants, and I immediately leave the floor to Uri Dadush. Thank you very much, Uri. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Antonio. It's a pleasure to chair this webinar. I'm Uri Dadush, Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South, and also non-resident scholar at Bruegel, the think tank in Brussels. Welcome everybody, benvenuti a tutti in italiano et bienvenue à tous en français, puisqu'on va utiliser toutes ces langues. Let me just get into the substance. The Fit for 55 initiative announced on 14th of July aims to ensure that the EU is on track to achieve a 55% greenhouse gas emissions cut by 2030 from the level of 1990 and to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. This represents a substantial acceleration of decarbonization from the previous target under the EU Green Deal of a couple of years ago. It is, of course, just a proposal by the Commission, still to be agreed in the European Parliament and by the member states. The Fit for 55 initiative includes at least 12 packages. It's a huge initiative. And these packages include revising the emissions trading scheme of the European Union. It includes a carbon border adjustment mechanism that we will discuss today as well. It includes toughening emissions regulations in EU states, revising taxation of energy. It includes a social climate fund and several special initiatives for sectors such as cars, aviation, and maritime. But of course, the EU only accounts for 9% of global emissions. In order to achieve the Paris Agreement targets, at least, or not at least, but for sure, the United States and China would have to follow a similar path to that of the EU. In fact, every country in the world needs to contribute in order to control the greenhouse gas emissions. And that includes the Maghreb, Algeria, Libya, Morocco, and Tunisia. The EU is, of course, the Maghreb's most important economic relationships and has links, very tight links to it, going back to colonial times and well before colonial times. And so the effects of the EU's scheme on the Maghreb will work not only through the effect on trade and investment, among others, but also through the power of example. In discussing how the Maghreb will be affected and can affect the outcome of the Green Deal, we have 6 speakers today, each of whom will have 8 minutes, not more than 8 minutes, so we allow time for discussion. And I will introduce them as we go along. Let's start then with Amin Benis, who is visiting fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. And he has substantial experience of working on energy and infrastructure transactions and policy initiatives in the government and private sector. And his geographic focus is the Eastern Mediterranean, the Maghreb countries. So Amin will give us a general perspective and will be followed by Ilaria Urbani, who I'll introduce in a moment, who will talk more specifically about renewable energies in the Maghreb. Amin, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Uri, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the Italian Institute for International Political Studies and to the Policy Center for the New South for having me today. My thoughts are inspired by a paper I published earlier this year when I was a visiting fellow at the ECFR, the European Council on Foreign Relations. As you know, the European Green Deal is the EU's roadmap to become climate neutral by 2050. And one of the explicit goals of such Green Deal is to strengthen the EU's global leadership. One way to achieve this is by establishing environment, energy, and climate partnerships with the states of the EU southern neighborhoods, and in particular those of the Maghreb. So I see 2 main trends. The first one is the link between the EU Green Deal, economic development, and migration. The European Green Deal can effectively offer ways to create local workforce opportunities in renewable energies, which can in turn contribute to economic development and mitigate migration flows. And the European development assistance for the development of the green energy sectors in Maghreb countries can effectively provide a source of significant economic development and local employment to the extent they involve not only European investors, but also local developers, subcontractors, and workers. The second main trend is the EU climate neutrality target and the hydrogen prospects from the Maghreb. Some EU member states will effectively need to import a large amount of the green hydrogen to reach their carbon neutrality targets. And hydrogen can be seasonally stored and transported cost effectively over long distances using, amongst others, gas pipelines. So the EU can actively pursue these opportunities for cooperation on green hydrogen with Maghreb countries as a way to contribute to its 2050 carbon neutrality target. So there are various ways for the Europeans to use the Green Deal to enhance cooperation with the Maghreb countries and contribute to their reciprocal green transition. First of all, by using financing sources. So they should make use of what we call the EFSD Plus mechanism, the European Fund for Sustainable Development Plus mechanism, which is a new regulation, an integrated financial package that supplies financing capacity through grants, technical assistance, financial instruments, and budgetary guarantees. So the Commission should incentivize companies willing to invest in renewables in the Maghreb to use the EFSD Plus to bridge the funding gap of the energy transition. There is also the benefit of the EU projects of common interest to access funding from the 30 billion euros EU Connecting Europe facility for cross-Mediterranean project. So what are those strategic projects? First of all, think about the green electricity interconnection in the Mediterranean by connecting renewable energy facilities to existing or to new cross-Mediterranean electricity connections, and therefore address some of the potential challenges of the EU Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, the CBAM. I won't speak long about the CBAM, but just a very few words. The CBAM is expected to be set up gradually, and it will initially apply to a selected number of goods that have a high risk of carbon leakage, which are iron and steel, cement, fertilizer, aluminum, and electricity generation. So a reporting system will apply from 2030 for those products to facilitate a smooth rollout and a dialogue with third countries. And then importers will start paying a financial adjustment from 2026. So the CBAM could affect some of the following Maghreb exports to the EU, such as fertilizers and electricity for Morocco, cement, fertilizers, iron and steel for Egypt, fertilizers for Algeria. Exporting green electricity from a country such as Morocco to Spain and Portugal could be done by using a certification confirming that the exported electricity is from a renewable source to address some of the potential restrictions of the CBAM. And this would be in line with an ongoing project to facilitate cross-border trade between producers of green electricity and corporate consumers in the region. In Tunisia, the ELMED interconnection project with Italy could facilitate the export of green electricity in Europe once the country has scaled up its solar power generation. At the moment, there is a funding gap that could be filled with the European Fund for Strategic Investment. And the Egyptian government is also in talks with private investors to develop a 2,000 megawatt capacity in an interconnection line, which is a project in two phases, the first one with Cyprus and then with Crete. So the imports of green hydrogen from Maghreb countries. The EU member states should establish partnerships with those of the Maghreb who are engaged in green hydrogen, such as Morocco, to import green hydrogen as a way to complement European domestic efforts to decarbonize their economy. And green hydrogen could be transported to Europe by using cross-Mediterranean pipelines or by sea. So these were the strategic project aspect. Now, in terms of policy dimension, there is a need to increase technical and capacity building assistance to some key energy stakeholders which are in need to facilitate the implementation of renewable energy projects. This could be the case, for instance, for Tunisian and maybe also Libyan stakeholders involved in the development of renewable energy projects if in need of capacity building. And that would require EU budgetary support for such stakeholders to incentivize their staff to engage with these ambitions, to improve the efficiency of internal processes and governance, set up project management structures with one-stop shops to facilitate the completion of strategic projects in renewable energies. Now, also, there is an important opportunity, which is to target the European Green Deal to create jobs, to strengthen the resilience of fragile regions, in particular in the Maghreb. So the EU could engage in policy dialogue with the Maghreb authorities to ensure that green investments are, as part of the EU Green Deal, are tailored to create local workforce opportunities, increasing inclusive employment, reduce poverty, and ultimately contribute to mitigate migration challenges from the Maghreb by using, for instance, the incentive-based mechanism of the EFSD+. The EU could also think of creating a funding compensation mechanism to assist the Maghreb countries that could be adversely impacted by the potential challenges of the CBAM. This would resemble, for instance, to the EU Just Transition Mechanism, which provides financial assistance to the EU regions that are highly dependent at the moment on fossil fuels and high emission industry, and in order to facilitate their green energy transitions. So in conclusion, I would say that there is indeed a significant opportunity for both the EU and the Maghreb countries to make good use of the EU Green Deal to strengthen their partnerships and progress toward their green energy transition. This would, however, require significant policy dialogue and transactional funding in a path that can address common strategic interests such as development, migration, poverty reduction, and local and inclusive employment. So I will leave it now to Ilaria to continue with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was brilliant. A lot said in a short space. Let me introduce then Ilaria Ubani, who is the MENA, Middle East North Africa Region Project Manager for the RES4 Africa Foundation. Ilaria works to support Africa's energy transition, mainly covering Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, and Algeria. And she has a PowerPoint presentation. Go ahead, Ilaria.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dadosh, to speak here, to give me this opportunity to speak here in this panel. It's a great honor for me to represent RES4 Africa Foundation in this event. So let me leave you some word regarding RES4 Africa Foundation. RES4 Africa work to create a favorable condition for scaling up renewable investment in Africa, bring on board some member and partner that come from all over the world and are on the forefront of the green energy revolution. our commitment is work in Africa, for Africa, with African, to support the renewable energy revolution. And our aim is to translate the word into action through strategic program and strategic initiative. One of them is the RES4Med program that has the aim to support the renewable energy transformation in the southern and eastern Mediterranean area, promoting dialogue and strategic partnership, conducting strategic analysis and disseminate knowledge in dedicated event. The Maghreb country are the country in which we are focused on also inside the RES4Med program. They are strategic for Europe, but we know that after the EU Green Deal, the EU import of fossil fuel will decrease between 2013 and 2015. With the huge renewable potential of the region, we are sure that the country can still play a central role also for Europe. And the renewable can at the same time help and support the country to meet the growing demand of a growing population that reach about 102 million of inhabitants, fight against the climate change because the region suffer a lot for the climate change effect, and reaching at the same time the rest target avoiding the CO2 emission. Regarding the CO2, Libya and Algeria now account the highest emission from oil and gas production in the world. Plus Egypt, they account for 12% of global oil and gas methane emission. And we are sure, and also from IEA, we received this information, so we can confirm that the Maghreb country can avoid until the 55% of methane emission with no cost, because the value of the captured methane will be greater than the cost of installing the abatement measure. So it's crucial for now on to accelerate the renewable energy investment in the region. RES4Africa started also to investigate what in the last 10 years in the Middle East and North Africa, including not only the Maghreb country in the analysis, but also all the North African countries. We discovered that only 0.5% of world additional installed capacity come from MED. We will present also the result of this important study next year. I kindly also invite you to join to our event organized by our foundation. Inside this study, we analyze also the factors that affect the renewable growth, and we discover that the politics often interfere with regulatory progress. There is a lack of secondary legislation, slow amendment process, lack of bankability of PPA, the difficult to obtain sovereign guarantee, and in some cases also to secure financing from a local bank. Regarding the business environment, there is a general lack of transparency, in particular on the tariff that is not cost reflective, and also in the tender, because it's a lot of time, it's a lack of standardized documentation, slow auction process, and also a local content requirement often too high. RES4Africa always this year investigate listening also the voice of investor in another important study, the survey that we launched in 2012. We extended the perimeter of analysis of the our survey 2016 that we have already made, and we cover all the Maghreb country. From this analysis, we discovered that the overall risk level clearly show the diversity of the region. Morocco is a low risk perceived, while Tunisia had made great important improvement in certain area, but other require more policy effort. Algeria and Libya are still perceived as a high risk, attracting renewable investment, but they still require significant additional effort to attract a new one. And for Morocco and Tunisia, that has been covered of both the edition, we noticed that the perception or the risk perception in the past 5 years, the overall perception has decreased. Morocco emerged as a regional champion in terms of risk reduction. In the 2021 survey, we included also the public, not only the private sector, but also the public sector. And we discovered that the perception of risk are not the same between them. Risk perception, there is a risk perception gap. Private sector stakeholders tend to see more risk than the public one. And also the topics and their concern are not the same. So what we can do and how also Green Deal can help the renewable energy development in this region. First of all, we need to foster the energy mix diversification, reduce dependency on hydrocarbon fiscal revenue, advance with subsidized reform to move away from high subsidized and distorted fossil fuel-based market with a cost-reflective tariff. Develop a clear energy transition plan, promote structural change. It's necessary also to change the behavior in the consumption partner. Address also the digitalization, the decentralized solution and smart solution. Is it necessary to improve policy and regulatory framework, focus on efficient organization, management of auction. The auction are recognized as the most effective scheme to add renewable energy capacity. Create independent regulator, create also a develop master plan for renewable, and last but not least, improve energy cooperation. Establish a partnership with Europe member state could enhance energy cooperation with Maghreb, could also support the Maghreb in this energy transition. It's all for my side. I hope to stay in the 8 minutes.
You did very well, Ilaria. It looks like I'm going to get a plate of spaghetti from your colleagues next time I'm in Rome. Well done.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So now we move on to my colleague and friend, Rim Rahab. She works on mainly on energy issues, but actually on a number of other development issues at the Policy Center for the New South, where she's a senior economist. Rim, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Yuri. So first, I would like to express how delighted I am to be part of such interesting panel and thank the organizers for creating the space to have such interesting discussions. So there is no doubt that climate crisis is imminent and that we must take action urgently to address it. And it was highlighted by the two previous speakers. So as an economist and researcher from the Maghreb, I can't help but wonder about the implications of those ambitious packages like the European Green Deal on our region and particularly on Morocco. So I will perhaps take a different outlook and bring attention to a specific mechanism introduced within the Fit for 55 package under the European Union unveiled last July. And I would like to focus mainly on the carbon border adjustment mechanism and particularly highlight areas of concern and issues that the CBAM is likely to raise for developing countries, including those of the Maghreb. So most of the points that I will bring out stem from a recent paper by Yuri and me and another young researcher, Afaf, on the impacts of the carbon border adjustment mechanism, or CBAM, on Morocco. So basically, the CBAM aims to apply the same carbon tax to the import of some high-emitting and highly trade-exposed sector as is applied to domestic producers in the EU. And so far, 5 categories of products are covered by this tax, as was mentioned by Amin, which are electricity, iron and steel, aluminium, cement, and fertilizers. So my first point is that Morocco is not a big exporter of these goods, except perhaps for fertilizers. But given that Morocco and the EU share strong economic ties, if adopted, the CBAM will certainly affect Morocco. So in our paper, we established that Morocco's industry is still highly emission intensive, particularly for heavy industries such as chemicals and cement, meaning that it produces or it generates more GHG emissions per unit of value added than the EU, which puts Morocco at risk. So some people can argue that Morocco should not worry since the products currently covered by this mechanism constitute only 4% of Moroccan export to the EU. But this reflects a very short-sighted view because CBAM will nonetheless impose substantial costs through increased tariffs on Moroccan goods exported to the EU, especially if it is extended to other sectors in the future, which is the aim after all. And with the EU ETS price recently exceeding 60 euros per metric ton of CO2 equivalent emission, this is not an insignificant cost. My second point or concern is the negative implications that the CBAM is likely to have on the global trading system. So it is true that as proposed, the CBAM can technically be presented as WTO compliance because it does not discriminate between EU firms and EU trading partners. However, assuming that other countries opt for such systems, the structure of each national scheme will vary, as will the many assumptions needed to calculate the appropriate tax in each case. As a consequence, carbon border taxes, whether based on EU ETS or other systems, will vary not only by country of destination and product, but also by country of origin and firm. And this is a practice that would deviate significantly from the WTO's most favored nation principle. And moreover, to avoid various forms of trade deviations, the calculation of the border tax will sooner or later have to include a calculation of indirect emissions along the value chain, which implies rules of origin of various kinds, which is another area of concern. So at the same time, not all WTO members will be trusted to design a fair emission trading system, and many, particularly least developing countries, will lack the capacity to administer it. So each of these challenges also poses a risk to EU exporters themselves, who face a virtual certainty of retaliations from partner countries. So beside this, the CBAM can also be seen as problematic because it is so selective, in the sense that it covers only politically treatable sectors in the EU, and the glaring omission is agriculture, which the EU subsidizes heavily, and yet it is exempted from both the EU ETS and the CBAM. So my third point of concern is that the CBAM might also be seen as inconsistent with the Paris Agreement itself, because the proposed mechanism, which does not mention any country exemption, by the way, would penalize the least developing countries where the implicit carbon tax is below the EU price or where carbon intensity is higher. Even though under the common but differentiated responsibility principle under the Paris Agreement, the intent is that the carbon price can be lower for least developing countries, particularly for some periods of time. And the International Monetary Fund has actually weighed in on this specific issue, and IMF researchers have recently proposed a carbon tax that is differentiated by stage of development, for instance. So in our opinion, the CBAM will be viewed as illegitimate by many developing countries and others. And for instance, Brazil, India, China, and South Africa formally communicated their strong opposition to the CBAM at the end of their April 2021 basic group meeting on climate change. So to conclude, I 100% agree that climate change is mankind's greatest priority. I also believe that the EU CBAM is a well-intentioned effort to encourage decarbonization outside EU's border. However, it introduces enormous complexities that risk fatally undermining the already fragile foundation of the world trading system. And it will also be strongly resisted by developing countries that perceive it as inconsistent with the Paris Agreement. So for these reasons, my co-author and I believe that the CBAM is not a sound policy and that Morocco should express its concern in line with those of many other trading partners of the EU. But at the same time, the CBAM proposal is a wake-up call for Morocco that the time is ripe for a more concerted and comprehensive decarbonization effort. Because if we look at it, this proposal signals that carbon pricing regulations and taxations will inevitably intensify, and that Morocco needs to accelerate its own decarbonization efforts, which have been insufficient despite some numerous achievements. So Morocco needs to move concretely from the proclamation of ambitious targets and make the hard choices to advance or accelerate its energy transition. And this will, of course, require the provision of appropriate means to achieve it, including international cooperation, notably with the EU, as well as rigorous and transparent monitoring of progress. So I will stop here. Thank you very much. And I will be delighted to continue the discussion over the Q&A session.
And I'm sure there'll be plenty of opportunity to do that. I want to encourage our audience to send their questions through the chat function. So far, we have covered the overall view of the potential for the Maghreb to benefit from the Green Deal, which Amin put out. Ilaria talked at some length about the potential for renewable energies, and Rim described why she's so concerned, as am I, as a co-author of her paper, with the carbon border adjustment mechanism proposed by the European Union. We've covered those three topics so far, and we are operating in good time. So now I want to give the floor to who is it who I said would speak for us? I'm trying to remember. Slim. Slim Otmani, who is going to give us a perspective from his think tanks that deal mainly, as I understand it, from a business perspective on the issues, and is looking at it broadly for the Maghreb as a whole. Slim, please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you for this invitation to speak about this issue that we are not covering as much as you would expect from us. But at least you gave us 4 questions that we have to address, and I will start only with the first one to be short in my speech. I like it because the question related to the progress made, it gives me the opportunity to raise the question about the agenda of each country of North Africa in comparison with the one of the European and other Occidental countries. You assume in those countries that we have the same priorities, which clearly are not. And when I heard all the fantastic proposal made by Amin and the assessment made by Amin, Ilaria and Reem and everything around this energy transition, everything was made in direction for Europe. But probably we don't have, as I said before, the same priority. Even if our government agreed to follow the global recommendation and sign the different international agreements on climate change, we have so many issues that you in Europe have already overcome that require infrastructure, human resources, know-how, and finally founding without, and this is a question, founding without compromising the sovereignty of North African countries, because now it became a big subject and a big issue in our region, and this involves major change in our social and economic environment. This means important political and diplomatic discussion in perspective with the EU. Let me take an example of some political things that how political things interfere with the execution of those plans. If we take the famous Desertec project, I knew very few about this project, but the few that I've heard of make me feel that political concern, political issue, political fight in Europe could jeopardize the development or the execution of a transition plan in North Africa. Fights between two countries in Europe have led to abandon the famous Desertec project, who will supply Europe with electricity and all North Africa. And this is very important for me. But the most important thing is that we are still in the world, in overall, and in our region, in the same story, same one at the beginning of humanity, of water, energy, and food. And the main and the most important issue that we have in our region is water. And why we shouldn't focus all those efforts? Because if I look at the Green Deal plan, and if we follow the Green Deal plan that you have in Europe, it will require billions and billions and billions of dollars, which we don't have. I know there's some solution to provide some billion, but this has also, this led to a decision made by the civil society, not only by governments. We have to choose our partner. We have to choose to whom we're going to take the money from. We have to choose which direction we're going to go. And first of all, we have to solve the issue of water. Let me show you only one slide without any writing, if I may. Sorry. I'm going to show you one slide about this one. Yeah. This one, where's my slide? Sorry, hold on a second. Okay, I'll try to have it. I don't know why. Here it is. Okay. This slide shows the water capacity priority for Europe to address. Could you imagine a country like Libya, a country like Algeria? We are lying over a bed of water. Morocco also have huge quantities of water in the ground. This should be our priority before spending billions in sticking to the European agenda. Once we're going to have water, we already have the energy that comes from renewable energy. We have oil, we have gas, and we have an important solar coverage. What is missing is water. We have a young population that is educated, not perfectly educated, okay, but they can work as long as we have the famous resource, which is water. So my only why I really wanted to make this this speech is really to attract your attention on the fact that the famous 8 goals of the European Green Deal plan could be, yes, the plan of North African country, but as number 1, not clean energy. Number 1 is water. And I don't see anything about water and European, North African country and European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Slim.
Yeah, I'm going to stop.
Okay, can you stop sharing? Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I sent you a question via the chat, Slim. You might look at it and respond to me. Let me then move to, if I may, to Larabi Jaidi, who is my also my colleague and friend at the Policy Center for the New South, where he's a senior fellow. Larrabee is an economist who focuses on international issues, social development, and Mediterranean studies, and he is a member of the commission, the Royal Commission on the New Development Model in Morocco, very, very active member who's looked overall at the development strategy of Morocco, which of course has to include these climate issues as well. Larrabee, please go ahead.
Thank you, Rudy. You know that in the EU Green Deal is providing a roadmap to achieve a transition to a sustainable and green economic model as a promise for prosperity and resilience. And the ambition to make the EU the first climate neutral continent by 2050 cannot be achieved by Europe on its own. The transformation of the EU economy will also depend on its partners' effort, including in its most immediate neighborhood, such as the Maghreb. This is why I think the EU will have to cooperate with its southern neighbors to accompany the recovery and transition towards a more sustainable economic path. And this priority will undoubtedly and notably further guide the Euro-Mediterranean cooperation through the mobilization of expertise, funds, and the creation of a new environment, energy, and climate partnerships in the region. The ambition of the EU Green Deal in the Maghreb context, is marked by the socio-economic consequences of the pandemic. And I think that the debate is how to catch this opportunity to use this crisis to advance in towards a greener and more circular economic model in our countries in Maghreb. And energy will be addressed as one of the pillars of this transition. It's not the unique pillar. Where interdependence between both shores of the Mediterranean demands coordination and collaborative solution. About the post-COVID recovery in Maghreb, I think that we are in a context to turn the economic crisis into an opportunity for a green and circular transition. And the transition to green economy requires nothing short of a major structural transformation of economic models, domestic, I mean in the Maghreb, and in Europe, and global. And due to the social, economic, and political heterogeneity in the Maghreb region, it is obvious that one-size-fits-all solution is not suitable. Maghreb countries are far from mainstreaming green and sustainable development principles in their economies, despite the progress in Morocco or in Tunisia. For example, in terms of planning in Morocco and Tunisia, developed national strategies and priorities regarding green growth, driven both by their comparative advantage in certain sectors, such as renewable energy production, but also by resource scarcity that is already tangible. Specifically, water stress is in most countries and high dependence on energy import. Even those countries that have made the greatest strides in planning, I mean Morocco and Tunisia, strides in planning struggle with the implementation and evaluation due to problems of governance in these countries. We need to include domain-specific and country-specific study to propose recommendations on how to accelerate the green economy in this particular context. The EU Green Deal is also an opportunity to move towards the energy transition in Maghreb. I think that the success of EU Green Deal and is intertwined with a green transition in the economies and its close partners, the Maghreb, and more largely Southern and Eastern Mediterranean region. In this regard, the energy package of the European Green Deal, is it really relevant to promote the future energy partnerships with these countries? This package needs to complement the objective of securing energy supply in the EU with a radical change in the EU's support to hydrocarbon production and marketing in the Southern and Eastern Mediterranean countries. In this context, also, the renewed partnership Southern Neighborhood proposes a new and ambitious, innovative agenda for the Mediterranean and for the Maghreb countries. But the new agenda for Mediterraneans incorporates new area forms of cooperation identified during the pandemic crisis. The new agenda for the Mediterranean offers opportunities on strategic priorities of green and digital transition, and is based on the conviction that sustainable prosperity and resilience can only be built in strong partnership across the Mediterranean. In this context, I think that the challenge is how to reinforce resilient economies in the Maghreb. For example, for Morocco, EU stands ready to contribute to Morocco's economic recovery by co-financing investment funded under the Strategic Investment Fund. Yeah. But we have to mobilize these funds and to affect and to orient this fund to the sectors and to transformation in a structural economy. And the second challenge is how to build sustainable economies. It's a question for Algeria and for Morocco and for Tunisia, the same. For Algeria, the EU will support the Algeria in its effort to develop further a green and circular economy. How to optimize and to protect environment and sustainable use of natural resources, including in agriculture, including in fisheries. And I think that in Morocco, in line with the EU-Morocco Green Partnership, we have a fast track to the transition to a circular, low emission and inclusive and resilient economy. The other, I think, thematic, very important, is how to reinforce green growth and climate action in this country and in the region at all, in order to meet the scale of investment required to help public authorities, whether central government or local authority, to raise the necessary capital from both national and international private investors. The last thematic, I think, is the energy transition and energy security. For Morocco, the EU will expand its support to Morocco's efforts to meet its ambitious renewable energy and energy efficient targets. In Algeria, the hydrocarbon sector is the backbone of the Algerian economy and the main contributor to GDP and the state budget, with the energy transition as a key priority. All these questions, I think, are very important, but I think that the landscape is how to reinforce a geopolitical angle or the geopolitical dimension to reach this priority. And the Green Deal brings together with the two key European Commission priorities, I see, the ambition to become the world's first climate neutral continent and to be strong global and regional sector.
Larabi,
geopolitical aspects, yes?
Larabi, I have to stop you there because of the time constraint. I'll give you 30 seconds to conclude, please.
Okay, no, I think that we have to, the question is the carbon border adjustment mechanism. I think that my colleagues have developed this question in their contribution or in their intervention. In my opinion, the question of hydrogen is important for the future in the cooperation between Europe and the region, Algeria or in Morocco specifically. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Larabi. Sorry to stop you there. Last but not least, Ayman Sherkawi with the Mohammed VI Foundation, who's been working on these issues. Ayman, please go ahead.
Hello, thank you very much. Yes, I am with the Mohammed VI Foundation for Environmental Protection. This foundation has been in existence for 2 decades now, and it has been chaired since day one by Her Royal Highness Princess Lala Hasna. The foundation's activities focus around environmental awareness raising and capacity building. It has a series of activities with its partners that look at coastlines, oceans, air quality. Evidently, when we're talking about air quality, we also started at the time to look into climate action. Ecosystems, of course, being an important area of action of the foundation throughout the entire territory of Morocco, from the north to the south. When it comes specifically to the value added of the various programs of the foundation, clearly the focus is on education for sustainable development. That is evident through programs such as the Eco-Schools programs and the Young Reporters for the Environment that are implemented by the foundation and its partners in Morocco. You can see behind me a more recent example of that commitment. The video that is showing in the building behind me is the Hassan II International Environment Training Center that was inaugurated in 2019 by Her Royal Highness Princess Lala Hasna. The geographic scope of activity of the foundation and its partners evidently, as I mentioned earlier, encompasses the entire territory of Morocco, but also beyond that, in natural geographic areas for the country. And by that, I mean specifically Africa and the region of the Mediterranean Sea. Earlier, the moderator referred to a lovely plate of spaghetti that he's looking forward to enjoying. I'm more of a penne person myself, but I would like to join him when the situation allows to share with that with spaghetti. When it comes to Africa, some activities linked to the Africa Green Universities and Youth Education Network. And now I will make more of a connection to specifically the topic of today, which is climate action to a certain extent, looking at this, the potentialities around this new deal. And as such, the foundation had launched with its partners the African Youth Climate Hub that facilitates entrepreneurship and solutions that are defined and promoted and supported when it comes to African youth in particular. The interest, as I mentioned earlier, of the foundation and its partners for climate action is not recent. It dates back more than a decade now. Indeed, the foundation and its partners was one of the first stakeholders, if not the first stakeholder in the Arab region and in Africa to put in place greenhouse gas calculation tools that was based on a methodology from an European Union country, but adapted and contextualized to Morocco. As such, we have more recently launched an effort in a facilitative manner in close partnership with leading stakeholders in the country, including the Ministry of Industry and Trade in Morocco, the Ministry of the Energy Transition and Sustainable Development, as well as stakeholders and institutions such as the Moroccan Agency for Energy Efficiency and the Moroccan Institute of Normalization and the CBAM, the Moroccan Employers Association. This particular group and coalescence of stakeholders is going to be working particularly on how to further decarbonize the Moroccan economy. Once again, this Moroccan-led effort is an effort that is an update effort on various partnerships and concrete outcomes that have been reached for more than a decade now. One of the first objectives of the task force that has already defined a work plan is to update and adjust the greenhouse gas emission tools that was put in place more than 10 years ago. Because evidently, since then, a lot of progress has been made in the country, but at the same time, there are areas of improvement, whether it is in terms of the tool itself, but also in terms of the actions that can be undertaken by the various partners, by the Moroccan economic stakeholders as a whole, when it comes to decarbonizing the Moroccan economy in the context of sustainable development. I think I only have a couple of minutes left, and I think it's important to leave ample time for discussion. So briefly, I would like to conclude on 2 points. The first of them is to invite you to join digitally an event that will take place a few days from now, on the 26th in the morning, that is entitled A Low Carbon Transition Resilient to Climate Change, the Engagement of Morocco's Economic Stakeholders. It will be an hybrid event that will include ministerial participation and all kinds of high-level thought leaders and action leaders that are committed to that transition. I'll be happy to share more details with the organizers so they may spread the word. The second point is to connect also on some points that were raised by Rim earlier and that were also identified in the excellent paper she was referring to. One of them is to indicate that many of the concerns that she identified were echoed in a statement that was released earlier today by the like-minded developing countries group in the context of the upcoming COP26. So I would invite all of us to pay that specific attention to that. The second point I wanted to also connect with is the importance to, notwithstanding those developments and whether or not and what shape they take in the end, to keep in mind the level of ambition that has been owned at the highest level in the country when it comes to climate action, and to do our utmost to make sure that we can meet and potentially go beyond those targets, and that it is very much a facilitative effort that is relevant for all levels of society, and that ourselves at the Mohammed VI Foundation for Environmental Protection, in full respect of this principle of subsidiarity, are keen to work with all kinds of stakeholders in full respect of that principle and in the context of sustainable development for climate ambition and action. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Ayman. Let me encourage participants from the audience to send questions to us. You can do so, in different languages if it's easier for you, in French or Italian or English. I don't read Arabic, but I know some of my colleagues can deal with that very easily. Please, people from the audience, do participate, do send us your questions. In waiting for that, I actually have some reactions to the presentations. And before I ask my questions, are there from the speakers, do you have any questions or reactions to the other participants, to what the other participants have said? Or do you agree on it with everything that the other participants have said? Yes, Slim.
I have a reaction. I think it's a presentation of Ilaria. At one point, she talked about subsidies, and she expressed the point that by leading that type of project, we should pay attention to subsidies and remove the major part of the subsidies, if I understand clearly what was presented. I totally disagree with that. Because we will definitely need a lot of financial support, and this will be a really crucial political decision. From where are we going to get that financial support? How the mix will be done? It's not the business community that will decide, because it has to do with billions of dollars, and it will engage the whole society in overall. And this huge effort to raise the level of our energy transition and to reach those sustainable development goals, to be at the level of the Occidental countries, it's a huge bill that our societies have to pay. We should accelerate the process that probably take European 200 years to reach, and we should do it in less than 20 or 10 years. So you couldn't talk about subsidies that way. You should pay attention to that, and clearly there will be subsidies. It will continue. We will continue to have subsidies. I'm not influenced by the fact that we have a lot of subsidies in Algeria. I'm fighting against subsidies in Algeria, but not in that case. In the case of the project that will allow us to reach the level of conformity with the SDG goals, we will need definitely subsidies. It's terrible to say that, I know, but we will need subsidies. You couldn't do what other has done in 200 years, or you couldn't do it in 10 or 20 years. So, thank you.
Ilaria, Amin maybe also would like to discuss this issue. I have to say, as somebody who's a little bit outside this community of the climate analysts, I've been reading about big commitments, financial commitments, for example, under the Paris Agreement, $100 billion, etc., for many years now. And of course, it's included again in the EU Green Deal communication, the possibility that that'll happen. But then I don't actually see or hear very much concretely on the ground of what is happening. So perhaps Hilaria, I mean, this is an issue you want to enlighten us on. Is there real money flowing from the European Union to the Maghreb countries to facilitate their green transition? Maybe Larabi also has some views on that. Ilaria, you want to start?
Yes, first of all, thank you, Slim, for your position. The Rest for Africa reflection is based on the fact that the tariff a lot of time are not cost reflective, and so there is a sort of distortion on the perception. So our concern regarding the subsidize, it's only that one.
Okay, do you want to say anything about the flow of money from the European Union to the Maghreb countries to facilitate the energy transition? Is there any money actually being transferred now, as promised? Amin, you may have, or Larabi.
So thank you. Just first of all, I wanted to react, also give some thoughts about Slim's intervention earlier. I think on a couple of points. I think the Desert Tech initiative, if I recall, it dates back 2008 or 2009 maybe. I think even from the beginning it was seen as a very long-term outcome, and rather than something that would be achieved very much from the outset. So and it wasn't meant. I think it wasn't seen as an integrated plan to be done in a coordinated manner, where you have solar plants here, wind farms there, and at the same time being built, but step by step, what would happen in several decades. And it might be the case that in several decades, when we will look at all the renewable facilities for all type of technologies in the Maghreb region, that map of renewable facilities will very much look like what the Desert Tech people were thinking of at the very beginning. So this is just a thought. Another couple of things about the fact that you mentioned that the EU Green Deal is pretty much one-sided. I don't see it this way personally. I think that there are quite a few elements that benefit to, and it's also one of the goals of the EU Green Deal, basically contribute also to the green energy transition of the partners of the EU. In addition, obviously, to help the EU achieve its climate target. So when I spoke earlier, I mentioned a couple of elements which I believe are very much in that respect, which is first of all the export of energy, of electricity, for instance. The export here that I was talking about were the Maghreb countries. So the exporter is the seller. And then you have also the investments. They can be tailored to create renewable energies industries in the Maghreb countries. So that means local employment, local workers, local developers that benefit from that. But obviously it has to be done. It has to be tailored this way. You have to include elements such as local content, but also there must be political and economic willingness to make sure that these items are achieved, and there is also a balance between to reach between how much you want in terms of local content and how much return you give to the foreign investor, and also with all the infrastructure that you create. This infrastructure is per se one of the traditional elements of sustaining growth. Whenever there is a plan to achieve to counter a crisis, one of the classic responses, obviously, to build more infrastructure for all the effects that it generates on the economy, and that's one of the elements of the Green Deal that could benefit the Maghreb, obviously.
Okay, listen. I'm a very simple guy. I asked a question, is there money flowing? I didn't get an answer. If I don't get an answer, I'm going to assume that there is no money. Larabi? No, Larabi. Larabi?
Yes, okay. I think that the challenge of the Green Deal will require significant public and private investment. And I think that in order to reach the new greenhouse gas reduction target of 50% by 2030, for instance, annually investment in the energy system, including new interconnections, capacity, building renovation and replacement of existing energy, industrial infrastructure. We need to be approximately $350 billion higher this decade than the previous one. It is a very important sum. And the EU, I think, have to encourage the EU member states and European Development Agency and financing institutions, as well as other donors, to jointly develop together with the partner countries, with the Maghreb countries, a coherent and complementarity approaches to finance sectoral priorities in these countries. But I think that the architecture of the future European financial development of Green Deal is not ready now, I think.
Right. Okay. Ilaria, can I ask you to project the slide comparing the energy mix in the different countries?
This one.
Yeah, okay. I thought this was a very interesting comparison. You know, in Morocco, we like to think that we are champions of renewables, and to some extent, we are doing more than other countries with solar, wind in particular. But when you look at the energy mix in Morocco, it's actually the worst in the region, right? Because from the point of view of emissions, because it is not only heavily reliant on coal, it is much more reliant on coal than it was 10 years ago. Whereas Algeria and Tunisia and even Libya have a heavily reliance on natural gas, which is of course much less emitting than coal. So this is something for the Moroccans to ponder. Let me ask, well, our Moroccan contributors, Reem, Larabi, Ayman, what do you see as the main reason for this? Is there still such a big cost advantage to coal relative to, because I keep reading, again, I'm not an expert in this area, but I keep reading, it's much more efficient now, sun and wind, et cetera, and then I look at the numbers and I see coal increasing. So I say, well, what's going on? Where's the disconnect here? What is happening? Can any of you enlighten us a little bit?
Sure, Yuri, if I may start.
Yes.
Yes. So first of all, I would like to point out that the reason why we see such disparities in terms of energy mix is due to Morocco's electricity generation mix, which is, unlike other countries of North Africa, still reliant heavily on coal and a very small share of natural gas, whereas in other countries, as you see in the graph, in Tunisia, Algeria, and Libya, they use mainly natural gas for the production of electricity. So it is true that Morocco has undertaken a national energy strategy back in 2009, which has as objectives to diversify the energy mix and improve energy security, and has put ambitious targets for renewable energies, particularly from wind and solar. And we see that Morocco has put forward very ambitious targets in terms of installed capacity from renewables. And we see that unfortunately we didn't reach the 2020 targets. And when we look at the amount of electricity that is effectively generated, we see that renewable energy constitutes only 20% of the electricity that was generated in 2020, whereas 80% was split between coal as a majority and small shares of natural gas. There is also, and we don't see it much here, but if we look at Morocco's industry sector, again, we see that it is still dominated by fossil fuels, mainly oil products and electricity, which, as I has just mentioned, is dominated by coal.
Anybody else want to comment on this chart, which is really striking? By the way, one of the big questions it raises in my mind when I look at this is, if there was more regional cooperation, particularly between Algeria and Morocco, which are neighbors, the energy mix would look very, very different. Go ahead, Slim.
Yeah, it's one part of the answer is what you said, more energy cooperation, but the other part is also rational behavior from the European Union, because they are attracting more the outflow of natural gas from North Africa is going to Europe, and here you have another political issue. Should Algeria sell the gas to support the energy transition of Morocco and abandon coal, and then they abandon also their energetic independency? And strategically, it's difficult for and politically for a country to say, I will be totally dependent on the neighbor in front of me. Look at Europe, they diversified their gas from Russia, from Qatar, and from Norway, from different countries. So if you look at the case of Tunisia, probably 100% of the gas that you see here is provided by Algeria. We don't know the price, but probably it's a preferable price, lower than the international price. So Algeria is making probably, I'm not sure about that, but probably because it's a neighbor and because it's the country that played an important role during the Algerian revolution, etc. In the to get the independency, they are giving them a very attractive price. Should they do that for Morocco? It's always, as I said before, the political question is very important in that scheme, and probably sustainable development projects are the only one that could have probably a regional dimension and without only for energy. I'm not energy, sorry, taking out energy, but the other one collecting, the waste, etc. The only one that could have an importance and led to a Maghreb integration. But energy is definitely not the case. We will not reach something that is coherent in the near future, as long as there is all those other political interferences in Europe and in North Africa.
Yeah, okay, very good. Any other comments on this? If there aren't, then Ilaria, you might take it down so I can see. I can't see the chat function and so on. Yeah, okay. All right, we have a question from the audience. Reda Bahij is asking, what are the necessary actions for Moroccan industry to remain competitive and also to avoid, the carbon border adjustment mechanism taxes, et cetera, and to retain their access in the EU market? What does Moroccan industry have to do in order to retain free access to the EU market, to remain competitive? And she's especially, or he rather, is especially interested in the automobile sector. Rim, this might be a question for you.
Sure. And this is a very good question, because with such proposals coming to term, Morocco should plan for the possible impact on its competitiveness. So if we assume that the CBAM is accepted and Morocco is affected, one way to avoid this negative impact is to work seriously on decarbonizing or at a short-term step, diversifying the industry energy mix, which we have established earlier, is still dominated heavily by oil products and by electricity, which relies mainly on coal. So these are the first areas that Morocco need to focus on in order to maintain its competitiveness on the European market. Of course, these recommendations are not easy to achieve, and they will require a longer period of time. As for the automobile industry, so for now, the CBAM only covers 5 products that we mentioned, and automobile is not technically one of them. But unfortunately, we see that the CBAM will diversify in the future to cover other complex products and also along the value chain. So maybe in the future, if this proposition is accepted, the automobile industry will be targeted, and then Morocco will have to face bigger consequences. I would like to point also to one element that was cited in the proposition. So the CBAM the CBAM proposition states that agreement with third countries can be envisaged as a potential alternative to the CBAM, provided that they ensure a certain degree of efficiency and ambition to achieve decarbonization sector. However, the proposal does not offer specific details about that. So without any further details, that would leave it up to the European Union to decide whether Morocco or not has made sufficient decarbonization efforts, but that could be a point of entry for Morocco to negotiate with the EU with regards to these questions.
Yeah, so to elaborate a bit on the answer, I mean, some of it is what Moroccan industry needs to do to become more efficient in its use of energy. But a lot of it really has to do with what kind of power is given to the Moroccan industry. If the power, electricity is tremendously important in all aspects of manufacturing. If the electricity that's coming from the power grid in Morocco is based on coal, there's not much that industry can do, to change that. It has to be done at the level of the government authorities that are regulating the power industry. In this regard, I want to turn back to Ilaria a little bit, because obviously you and your foundation have thought quite a bit about, why and when renewable energies are adopted and why and when they're not adopted. And I remember in your presentation, you had a discussion of risks, okay? So here again, I have another disconnect. I have a lot of disconnects when I read about these issues. And the disconnect I have is you showed in your analysis that the risk perceived by investors in renewables is lowest in Morocco, okay? But yet I see that over the last 10 years, Morocco has greatly increased its use of coal. And although it has increased its use of renewables a little bit, it remains even more dependent on coal than it did 10 years ago. So where is the explanation? How come Morocco is a low-risk environment for renewables, but at the same time, its use of renewables remains minimal?
Probably the investor have recognized the progress that Morocco has done during the last year in terms of not only of the mix, renewable mix and the energy mix inside, but probably on the also the progress and the step toward a renewable energy transition, also under, for example, the electric mobility. Morocco plans also to develop the electric mobility. So maybe the perception of the investor is quite is a perception of a low risk country for this reason, because they see that in the projection for the future there will be possibility in terms of renewable energy transition. The main concern of our of the investor regarding the Morocco side are on the grid. They perceive that the grid access not very clear, all the procedure around the green access not very clear, also difficult to connect directly to the grid. There are problems related to permitting, but in any case they are confident on the future, and maybe they answer in a positive way for Morocco.
Okay, very good. Any other questions or comments from the participants? If not, I will just make a couple of concluding remarks very briefly. No? Okay. All right, well, look, as somebody who stands a little bit about this agenda, I'll just make a couple of general reflections. One is that there's a lot of talk and there's very little action, okay? That's what I get, whether it's on the funding area. Frankly, when I look at the statistics on what the European Union has achieved so far, as distinct from the plans, I also feel that about the European Union, for example, on its funding efforts, for example, on the effect of decarbonization policies in various sectors in the European Union, even on the weight of the ETS scheme. So a lot of distance between the talk and the walk, okay? The second thing, the second impression I have is the one about competing priorities, meaning, as Slim said, you know, we can all agree that climate policies are important, but we also have many other issues that we're trying to deal with, which to many look more pressing, like the water issue. So again, that's not to say the climate is not critical. It's to say we have to balance this, and we have to balance, of course, with the relative cost on which, again, another impression I have, we don't have sufficient clarity, because we keep reading that the cost of renewables is low, etc. But then when you look on the ground, there isn't sufficient progress, at least not in the region. And the fourth impression I have is, which is not a new impression, anybody who's worked in the region knows this, that there are a lot of things that we could achieve together if we were cooperating as a region, and especially so in this area of energy and mitigation of climate change, which is not possible at the moment because of the geopolitical differences. Look, I think with those words, I'd like to close it here with, frankly, a word of optimism that at least, we are having frank discussions about these questions with the European Union and within the region, and that, our respective think tanks are facilitating serious discussions in a way that, frankly, I feel is often not happening at the political level. I'll leave it there. I'd like to thank you very much. I think really you did a remarkable job, the speakers, both in respecting the time and covering the topic from different perspectives. And I hope we'll have another opportunity to exchange. In the future, I thank again ISPI and their med sector and the Policy Center for the New South for organizing this session. And I wish you the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.